It's not just that you're tired. It's not just sleep or stress. It's something deeper, something more mysterious and weighty. It's waking up already exhausted, as if you've run 1,000 silent marathons in your soul. It's that strange weariness that no nap can fix, the kind of exhaustion that presses against your chest like a divine hand trying to stop you, to get your attention. You've prayed, but the heavens feel closed. You've served, but the joy has dried up. You've pushed, endured, smiled, functioned, all while something sacred inside you is flickering, dimming, and no one sees it. They call you strong, dependable, a pillar. But God knows. He sees that your strength has begun to betray you. And maybe, just maybe, it's not weakness. Maybe it's a warning. There's a kind of holy fatigue that isn't about burnout. It's about redirection, a sacred resistance to your own striving. St. John Paul II once wrote that, "In the designs of providence, there are no mere coincidences. So why, in this season, does even the act of moving forward feel like dragging chains? Could it be that the Lord is not punishing you, but pausing you?" Scripture says in Isaiah 40:30-31, "Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. Not those who hustle, not those who fix it themselves, but those who wait, those who recognize that the ache in their spirit is not a failure, but a signal. The exhaustion you're feeling may not be from doing too little. It might be from doing things God never asked you to carry. There's something God may be trying to tell you in this fatigue that words could never express. He doesn't always shout. Sometimes He allows your very body to whisper what your heart refuses to hear. Stop. Be still. I'm trying to speak. If this story has already touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments, what do you think God is trying to show us through this? Now, let's continue. Have you ever noticed how the body speaks when the soul has been silent too long? That bone-deep exhaustion where you can't quite explain what's wrong, but nothing feels right, might not be physical at all. It might be spiritual, a whisper from God, buried beneath your schedule, your obligations, and even your prayers, pleading with you to notice that something is misaligned. We often associate God's voice with clarity, peace, or conviction. But the Lord, in His wisdom, sometimes speaks through emptiness, through weariness, through the quiet unraveling of the plans we made without Him. When your heart starts failing to find joy in what once thrilled you, when you dread things you used to love, this may not be depression. It may be divine interruption. St. John Paul II understood this. His own body weakened with time, but his spirit stayed attuned to the mysteries of God's will. He once said, "God does not ask us for the impossible. He asks for our surrender, our trust, and our faithfulness. But we often trade surrender for striving, trust for planning, and faithfulness for performance, until one day even our most faithful efforts feel strangely hollow. That's not coincidence. That's the quiet mercy of God, removing His peace from paths He never ordained. Sometimes we ask for direction and God doesn't give it. Instead, He gives us fatigue. He lets us taste the barrenness of walking in circles around a calling we haven't yet obeyed. The Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years, not because they didn't know the direction, but because they didn't trust the destination. And in that wandering, they grew tired, not just in body, but in soul. Could it be that your exhaustion isn't weakness, it's grace? That this discomfort is a holy warning. You've gone far enough in this direction. Turn back, return to me. When the Lord removes the energy from your striving, He is not abandoning you. He is gently calling you out of Egypt again, out of captivity, out of self-reliance, toward a land you haven't seen but were born to reach. There is a strange fatigue that visits the obedient. The ones who said yes when it cost them everything. The ones who left jobs, relationships, cities, because they believed they heard God say go. But months pass, sometimes years, and the promised land still looks like a desert. Their yes feels unrewarded, their obedience exhausting, and deep down, though they won't admit it, they wonder, did I hear him right? You did. But what you didn't know is that obedience isn't a shortcut to peace. It's a confrontation with everything inside you that resists full surrender. St. John Paul II spoke often of redemptive suffering, the kind that doesn't make sense in the moment, but transforms you into someone you never would have become on your own. He didn't avoid the cross. He embraced it, and so must we. Because obedience is not a transaction, it's a crucifixion, and before the resurrection comes, you must die to everything that expected God to move on your timeline. The exhaustion you're feeling right now, beloved, may not be a sign you've done something wrong. It may be the cost of doing something right, because obedience will strip you, it will empty you. It will force you to walk when you have no map, only a memory of God's voice. And yet, the book of Galatians reminds us, let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not give up. But what if the due season feels delayed? What if your spirit is sagging under the weight of a yes you barely have strength to carry? Then it is precisely now that you must understand. Your exhaustion is not the end of the story. It is the sacred place where your strength dies so His can begin. Because God never called you to obey from abundance. He called you to trust Him in drought. And sometimes that trust looks like praying without feeling, serving without applause, walking without answers. And still saying, "Here I am, Lord. I'm tired, but I'm yours." There comes a moment in the life of every believer when their strength fails. Not because they are lazy, not because they lack faith, but because God Himself is removing the scaffolding. You've leaned on your intelligence, your discipline, your charisma, even your theology, and still you find yourself drained in ways you can't explain. You didn't fall into sin, you didn't rebel, but something in your life has grown unbearably heavy. That heaviness may not be the enemy's attack, it may be the Lord's intervention. God does not compete for space in a heart already full of self-reliance. Sometimes He has to drain your energy to redirect your attention. This strange exhaustion, this holy depletion, is His way of pulling you out of the storm you've been trying to control with your own hands. You see, when your own strength is still working, you can confuse results with God's will. But when your strength dies and nothing moves, that's when His whisper gets louder. St. John Paul II often spoke of the silence of God, not as abandonment but as purification. He knew the weight of leadership, the agony of unanswered questions, the crushing fatigue of being both shepherd and sheep. And yet he said, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. What happens when both wings feel broken? When neither faith nor logic can carry you, that's when God steps in, not to give you wings, but to ground you, to stop you, to let your tired soul collapse into Him, because it's there, in the stillness, in the fatigue, in the holy ground of surrender, that He speaks again. Psalm 127:2 says, "It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for He gives His beloved sleep." You are not built to run endlessly. You are not asked to perform. You are called to rest. And sometimes when you won't rest by choice, God allows exhaustion to force what your soul has refused to receive: stillness. There is a silence that falls over your life when God is doing something too deep for words. A hush, a pause, a strange stillness that feels like punishment, but is actually preparation. And it's in that silence that exhaustion creeps in, not because you're being ignored, but because you're being emptied. God is clearing space for something heavier, holier, and more permanent than what you've known before. You've begged for clarity, cried out for breakthrough, asked for strength to continue, but the heavens remain quiet. Your prayers feel like they dissolve into the ceiling. You wonder, has he left me? Has he forgotten me? But child of God, no. This exhaustion, this silence, this season where nothing seems to move is not abandonment. It is the Spirit brooding over the deep, just like in Genesis, preparing the chaos of your life for creation again. St. John Paul II understood this mystery. As a man who carried the weight of nations in his intercession, he learned to trust God when there were no visible signs. "Be not afraid," he said, "not because there was nothing to fear, but because there is someone greater than fear. And this someone allows your strength to wither so that your dependency deepens. That's how he prepares you for the next. You are being refined, and refining is violent to the flesh. The fire that purifies gold doesn't ask for permission, it consumes. And when God refines a soul, he often begins by exhausting every counterfeit source of strength. He lets the things you once relied on collapse, not to destroy you, but to deliver you from idols you didn't know you had. In Deuteronomy 8:2, God reminds his people, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart." Strange exhaustion is sometimes that test, a divine examination of your trust, a stripping that reveals what you truly believe. You are not being punished, you are being positioned. And when the silence breaks, you'll see that the weariness was the womb of something holy. At some point, after all the crying, after all the confusion and collapse, something subtle begins to shift. Not in your circumstances, but in your perception. The exhaustion hasn't lifted yet. The silence remains. But there's a stillness now that feels less like despair and more like reverence. Your body may still ache, but your spirit senses it. God is near. The mystery is this: your deepest weariness became the doorway to your clearest revelation, because when everything else failed and you had nothing left to stand on, you finally stopped moving long enough to hear. And that's when you realized God wasn't silent, he was speaking in a different language. He was speaking through your depletion. He was saying, "Come to me." St. John Paul II once reflected that suffering, more than anything else, makes present in the history of humanity the force of the redemption. Why? Because suffering breaks open what comfort conceals, and exhaustion, when allowed to soften rather than harden the heart, reveals truths that ease and abundance could never teach. It is in this space, this humbled, slowed, surrendered space, that you begin to see what you once missed, that maybe the thing you were chasing so fiercely was never your portion, that perhaps the delay you hated was actually your protection, that maybe the doors that shut so painfully were the mercy of a God who knew you'd walk straight into destruction if he let you keep going. Isaiah 30:15 declares, "In repentance and rest is your salvation, in quietness and trust is your strength, but you would have none of it." How often has God tried to give you strength through rest, but you rejected it in favor of results? How many times has he offered you himself, but you chose performance instead? But not now. Now you know. Now you see. This strange exhaustion wasn't your failure, it was your awakening, a holy invitation to receive strength not from within, but from above, not through striving, but through surrender. There is a sacred kind of strength that doesn't rise until after everything else in you has fallen. Not the strength that comes from confidence or adrenaline, but the strength that comes from ashes. The kind that emerges when you've laid on the floor, when your tears have dried on your face, and you finally whisper, "God, I have nothing left. I need you." That is when heaven answers. You see, real strength is not the absence of exhaustion. It is what is born after exhaustion has done its work. When the soul is emptied of its pride, its agendas, its expectations, God moves. Not because you performed, but because you finally made room for him. St. John Paul II embodied this divine paradox. In his frailty, in his Parkinson's-ridden body, he radiated an authority that nations felt. Not because he was powerful, but because he was surrendered. His strength wasn't in his limbs, it was in his spirit. And that spirit had been carved out by suffering, by silence, by years of holy endurance. This is the mystery of 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness, not in clarity, not in talent, in weakness. In those moments when your legs give out spiritually, when your mind can't make sense of the plan, and when all you have is a desperate, trembling yes, you're starting to see it now, aren't you? The strange exhaustion was never a curse. It was a calling, a dismantling of false strength to make way for divine power, because what God is about to birth in you cannot be carried by the old you. The driven, exhausted, always performing you had to die, so the anointed, peaceful, unshakable you could rise. And here, in this new strength, something is stirring. You feel the first pulse of hope, the first breath of clarity. You're not just surviving anymore, you're sensing purpose, not in spite of the exhaustion, but because of it. The breaking was the beginning. And now, you are ready to hear what you couldn't hear before. After the storm, something in you sees differently. You no longer glance at people's smiles and assume they're whole. You no longer look at success and assume it means peace, because you've been emptied. You've seen how deeply exhaustion can hide behind routine, behind ministry, behind strength. And now, your eyes are changed. You no longer crave recognition, you crave revelation. You no longer ask, how do I keep going? But instead, where are you leading me, Lord? This strange exhaustion has recalibrated your discernment. It has taught you to recognize the weight of God's silence, not as distance, but as invitation. You begin to feel when something is off, when a door is not yours to walk through, even if it looks good. You begin to sense when the Lord is withdrawing his peace, not to harm you, but to steer you. This is the kind of spiritual sensitivity you cannot manufacture. It is only formed through the fire of spiritual depletion and divine encounter. St. John Paul II once said, "Do not be satisfied with mediocrity. Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." That call to go deeper is not for the comfortable. It is for those who have learned how to see in the dark, for those who no longer fear quiet seasons because they know those are often God's most intimate classrooms. Now in the quiet, you begin to hear things you missed before. You begin to ask different questions, not, "Lord, why am I tired?" but, "Lord, what are you teaching me in this fatigue?" And you begin to realize your spiritual exhaustion was the soil where wisdom took root. Not the wisdom of the world, but the wisdom of the Spirit, which teaches you to walk slowly, to speak carefully, and to discern deeply. Hebrews 5:14 says, "But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil." This maturity is what your fatigue has been forging, and now your eyes are clearer, your walk slower but more anchored. The strength you now carry cannot be taken because it wasn't built by you, it was given. Something profound happens when you finally surrender to the exhaustion instead of fighting it. You stop forcing doors open. You stop pushing your way forward out of fear you'll be forgotten. And in that stillness, you begin to notice a rhythm, a sacred pace that is not built on hustle, but on heaven's timing. It's not that your circumstances suddenly change. It's that you have changed. The heart that once ran from silence now finds comfort in it. The mind that once needed control now finds peace in letting go. You begin to walk, not in anxiety, but in alignment. And this alignment is not passive, it is holy, it is powerful, because now you are moving with God, not ahead of Him. St. John Paul II knew this rhythm. Despite the enormous pressures of his role, he moved with gentleness, depth, and deliberateness. He did not rush to speak. He listened, he waited, he trusted the invisible. "The future starts today, not tomorrow," he once said, but he did not mean rushing ahead. He meant surrendering now, yielding now, becoming available to God in this very moment, not in some future version of yourself. You begin to understand now why the exhaustion came. It wasn't random, it wasn't cruel, it was surgical. God allowed it to arrest your motion so He could reset your movement, because His calling over your life cannot be carried in human strength. You were never meant to outrun grace. You were meant to flow in it. Matthew 11:28-30 is no longer just a comforting verse, it's a living reality. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. My yoke is easy and my burden is light." That doesn't mean life will be painless. It means your soul will no longer be striving to prove or to earn. You'll begin to walk from a place of being already accepted, already known, already covered. Now you walk with peace. You carry discernment. You listen more. You rush less. And you begin to feel it deep in your bones. This is the pace you were born for.